So we've had quite the year for security news in 2022. There's been no shortage of things being exploited in browsers, operating systems, server software, network devices, Internet of Things, of course. And we've had the extremes of things like 0 days in browsers, breaches in cloud services like Dropbox and LastPass. Software bill of materials was everywhere. And as if to prove why we need it, so were vulnerabilities in abandoned pieces of software like OWA Web Server that all sorts of products are still relying on. More than a year has gone by, and we are still talking about Log4Shell and its kind of offspring like Spring4Shell and the Apache Commons text vulnerabilities and their impact. And of course, ransomware has gone nowhere. It's becoming so common that some insurers are starting to talk about refusing to insure that risk, the risk of breaches and ransomware, because it's so predictable now. And I can't sort of intro the year gone by without talking about and giving a special mention to the CVSS 10.0 critical vulnerability that the 0 Day Initiative dropped right before Christmas in the Linux kernel, which in the real world affects probably very few people. Fixes were available at the point it was dropped. In fact, they'd been available for a while. And the timing of the whole thing to me seems a tad disingenuous. But that aside, what I actually wanted to talk about from the last year was ProxyNotShell. We talked about this back in episode 4 of This Month in Security, around about when it came out, and we talked about the mitigations that Microsoft had put out. And exploitation was pretty well understood and discussed in the open at the point ProxyNotShell hit, which meant Microsoft had to rev their mitigation several times in the wake of it being disclosed and in the wake of it being fully understood. And then ultimately they released fixes in the November security update for Exchange. So you'd think it's done and dusted, right? Why am I bringing it up again? If you fast forward to the week before Christmas, ProxyNotShell came back. It came back when CrowdStrike noted that they were seeing the second stage of ProxyNotShell. ProxyNotShell was 2 vulnerabilities chained together, like an entry point and then the final exploit. And they were seeing that second stage be exploited without evidence of seeing the first stage be exploited. They did some digging and some reverse engineering and figuring out through logs of how it looked like this had been pieced together. And what it looks like is that between November and December, sometime in December, someone has reverse engineered the fixes that Microsoft put out in the November security update for Exchange. And they have figured out one of the other vulnerabilities that Microsoft fixed. So Microsoft fixed several things. We'll concentrate on 3 of them if you're talking about this. ProxyNotShell was 2 vulnerabilities chained together. And this new exploit is dubbed OWA SSRF by CrowdStrike, is the second half of ProxyNotShell with a new first half. And the new first half bypasses the mitigations that Microsoft put out for ProxyNotShell. It's a different endpoint that's being attacked. So ProxyNotShell was the auto-discover endpoint. OWA SSRF is the Outlook Web Access endpoint, hence the name. You would think, given that the amount of news ProxyNotShell got back in sort of September, October, November time, and how bad it was, that everybody would have patched by now, right? The November security update's been out for over a month. Plenty of time for it to roll through patches. But what it looks like is that as of a week or so ago, there's about 70,000 exposed Microsoft Exchange servers out there who have the mitigations in place for ProxyNotShell, so they were safe to that, but they haven't patched. So now they are all, once again, at risk of being popped, this time by OWA SSRF. Or repopped, if they were popped in the first place by ProxyNotShell. This, I think, for me, highlighted that, A, Mitigations are a great stopgap, but you shouldn't be relying on them long term, right? Fixes will come out, and for anything juicy enough, those fixes will be reverse engineered. And that means that you really want those fixes in place, because if someone reverse engineers the fixes, they will be looking for ways to get around the mitigations that were released. Right? That's the first thing they're going to go looking for. They're also going to be looking because, let's face it, if fixes come out, those fixes, you can't avoid giving away what the problem was in the fix, right? Because you've had to change the piece of code that was the problem in the first place. So when a fix comes out, the faster you can reverse engineer it as an attacker, the better chance you have of finding servers out there that are still vulnerable to the thing, whatever that is, that you can then attack in that window between the fix being released and the patches being applied. And I say all that knowing how difficult it is to patch enterprise systems at scale. It's a big problem. And I'm not sure what the answer is, other than, those of us in security constantly banging on about the importance of patching, while knowing that it's really difficult in the real world.
For me, the funny thing when I read about this kind of resurgence, it reminded me of a time that I was sitting in a room with one of my customers from upstate at 3 a.m. With like 15 people sitting around a table and just trying to figure out the OWA IAP. I remember thinking to myself, wow, if there's something like systemic at the core of this thing, there are so many entry points for this one application. It would be very easy for someone to just change where they came from, and lo and behold, I mean, that's a great pick. It's something I think if anyone has done work on Exchange, that they'd really see, wow, this is super exploitable. And it also, made me think of David's point from a few weeks back when we were talking about ProxyNotShell. This may be the thing that kind of really pushes people to migrate to the cloud and get away from some of this stuff, and really caring for some of these, these esoteric threats that they may not have the time to become security experts on.
Yeah, Exchange on-prem is a big hairy beast, right? It's very difficult to manage. It's very difficult to patch. It like you say, it's got a 1,000 different ways into Exchange, because it's like a lot of enterprise products that have existed for a long time. It's things bolted onto things, bolted onto things, bolted onto things. And all of the stuff still sits there to maintain backward compatibility with older clients. And, it's very hard for the vendor to close those holes, because if you turn a piece of functionality off that was only there to support, I don't know, an Outlook client from a decade ago, you can guarantee some customer was relying on that functionality. And you as an enterprise vendor are like, well, so I have to keep it around. That's a problem we all face. F5 faces that with pieces of functionality that are there simply to support legacy, stuff in classic big IP that's existed for since sort of 2005 at this point.